Hi folks, in the first part of this series we'll be focusing on the silver armour of this grim dark silver and red Necron. So without any further ado, let's cue the music. To start out with, I'll be base coating the model in black metal from scale 75, and I'll be applying this to the miniature over a neat even coat of black primer. You can use any black primer you want for this. I happen to use the Halfords one as it's my particular favourite, as it has a slight matte finish. My recommendation when applying a base coat of this black metal is to add just a little bit of water to the paint on your palette to ensure that it flows nicely off your brush, and it will prevent that from clogging up any of the nice details on this model. To really aid us with that darker feel of this miniature, you can choose to not put some of the silver into the more recessed and darker areas of this miniature. We will be coming in later to refine those shadows, but having some of the black primer being left in the shadows really helps to push that grim dark feel of this Necron sculpt. Once the base coat has been applied, your Necron should look something like this. I really do like this black metal from scale 75 due to its really fine pigment, and it has a very nice reflective shine to it once it's dried. The next step in painting the silver armour of this Necron is to apply an all over black wash to the miniature. Here I'm using Nuln Oil from Games Workshop, and I'm applying it onto the palette using a reasonably thin brush. Something like a size 1 or size 2 is perfect. Here I'm using the new STC brush from Games Workshop, and this smaller brush allows me to ensure that I have lots of control where I place the wash upon the miniature. When applying this wash, although you are going to be doing this in quite a liberal motion, you need to be careful to make sure that it doesn't pool too much or rest on any of the flat areas. If it does, just take a wet brush and move it around the miniature to make sure that it basically gives it a staining effect rather than something that sits into the recesses or sits in pools on the flat surfaces. As you move around the model and wait for it to dry, it can be worth keeping an eye on it, especially in areas that you've been liberal with the wash. As gravity is a thing, and a wash is a liquid, it tends to run down to the bottom of the model. You want to try to prevent this from happening too much and use your brush to take away any of the excess and prevent pooling and gravitational effects of the wash. And try to make this have a stained effect and start to make it look like aged dark metal. As an optional step, if you want to really push the grim and dark aesthetic of this, you may wait for this coat to dry and apply a more focused second coat into some of the more shadowed areas and places that wouldn't catch the light. Once the wash is dried, I'm then going to come back in with the original black metal colour, and I'm going to start lightening up the metal areas of the Necron. However, unlike a traditional painting tutorial where you will paint everything except the recesses, what we are going to do here is focus in what I like to refer to as a zenithal highlight. And with this, you may want to use a lamp shining down on the top of the miniature, or use your phone torch to work out where the light is hitting the model and has the strongest points of reflection. Once you've identified what these are usually on the top surfaces of each panel, component, limb of the model. We are then going to go back and layer this up using a little bit of water to aid the flow, and layer up back over the grimy tinted metal from the previous step. And with this, you want to maybe cover 50 to 60% of the previous covered area. And if you want, you can do little stippling motions to start building up some texture, but that is entirely optional. And with this, it's just a matter of you're taking your time, working out where you want the lighter areas to be, and starting to cover back up with the black metal. One of the big secrets with laying up a model like this is you don't have to be especially neat. You can use this as an opportunity to really push the light and the dark contrast on the model. And when it comes to zenithal highlighting, bits like this arm here, as well as highlighting on the top, what you can do is from the waist up of the model, highlight to the top surfaces of this arm. So look at the top of his head, along his forearms, and the top of his hand. But when it comes to things like the legs and armor panels, think about how the light's hitting the model. If the light's shining from the top, the very top is going to be bright, and then it's going to go immediately dark, and then it's going to get brighter and brighter as it goes down the panel as the light is hitting it from a much more shallow angle. And with this in mind, you can use it to build up a gradient and a transition of the light to dark in colour, or in our case, shades of silver. I have left this next bit playing at full speed without any voiceover so you can focus and see exactly what I'm doing with the brushwork. Once we have layered up with the black metal, we're then going to come in with some heavy metal, once again from scale 75. And I do prefer using the scale 75 metallics, as they do have a really nice habit of blending into each other and progress into a really nice smooth highlight with minimal effort on the painter's behalf. And what I'm going to do here is again a very similar technique to what I was doing in the previous step of layering up with the black metal. Except with this, we're going to focus on a much more smaller area in a much more controlled manner. With this step, we are looking to pick out and highlight where the strongest concentration of light will be hitting the model. And to maintain that grimdark feel and aesthetic with this Necron, this will be our last highlight onto the miniature. And just like with the previous step, I recommend sitting this down with just a little bit of water. It helps aid the flow of the brush and it adds a little bit of translucency, really helping with that layering motion. And as you can see on the shoulder panel, I'm covering about 30% of the actual panel itself, a strongest concentration to the very top of the panel where the light is strongest, and you can see my overhead light reflecting off the model, but I am still highlighting deep down in the shadows, and that really helps push the contrast on the miniature and really helps the model stand out on the tabletop. Again, just like in the previous step, it is a matter of taking your time and painting a little bit at a time. You may want to switch down to a smaller brush than the previous step just to give yourself that extra little bit of control. And don't worry if you make mistakes. If you cover too much of the previous area and you think, oh, that's too bright a highlight than I want to do, then don't worry, wait for that section to dry, go back to the black metal and layer back over the previous layer and have another go. These paints are thin enough and layer nice and easily, so you can quite easily cover up any mistakes that you made. Now I'll let this play at full speed for a bit so you can see exactly what I'm doing with my brush strokes. As you can see from the motions I'm doing here on the gun, I'm being really careful where I place the highlights, especially on areas where there's a long bar or that sort of forked bayonet spiky thing that he has at the front of his gun, making sure that we have some areas that are really bright but some areas that still the very dark Nuln Oil coated black metal, and it's this difference in colour that really causes the metallic areas to pop on the miniature. Always remember, with this highlight on a grim-dark aesthetic, it is entirely up to you with how bright you go. But I wouldn't recommend going any brighter than this colour, as it allows us to have a nice level of contrast while still keeping that moody appearance. And here we see the silver armour of the Necron with all the rest of the details painted in. Now don't worry, this is part 1 of a tutorial on this Royal Warden, and in further episodes we will cover the glowing red cables, the non-metallic red bayonet on his gun, and the gold and copper details that you see across his chest and on the armoured skirt. So why don't you subscribe so you get notifications when those tutorials are produced. See you next time, folks.